So, a lot of the ways that I'm approaching these projects is specifically so I'm not Curology. I had a pretty bad experience, and a lot of former employees also have had terrible experiences with Curology. It seems like at the start of the company, there were a lot of positive reviews. A lot of people were excited, they were motivated, they enjoyed their coworkers, they enjoyed the CEO's vision. And at the beginning, it seems like they were comfortable with the hiring practices and felt comfortable working there. As time went on, those slowly started to erode, and it seems like around the time of the pandemic, especially then, a lot of the cultural values just kind of fell to the wayside. It seems like there was a lot of cliquishness, a lot of favoritism, some nepotism was mentioned, etc. And this is over 240 reviews that are mentioning these things. Not all of them were negative, a lot of them were positive, so I do need to be fair, but the amount that were negative and the number of things they had to say, especially the amount of cohesion across those and the ways that they align with my experience, I'm not here to convince you to do anything, but I am here to say I cannot speak positively about this company. This is the cover letter that I wrote for them. Hello, Curology. I was doing a specific, I'm going to make a web page for each of the companies that I really want to work for. I got hired for Curology, I think August 15th was my start date. This is about 1 year ago in 2 days. Today's the 13th, 2023. So this is the thing that I have sent to most companies that I made this cover letter for, this about me. It says the same thing that all of them have said. I've been a developer for 12 years and have spent most of my recent time in TypeScript and React. I have experience developing, testing, and deploying accessible, responsive web applications across the stack. I have a GitHub account, which has examples of projects I've worked on over the past few years. Project-wise, I've spent the most time on a PHP framework and a programming language I developed. I've also recently taken a closer look at project architecture and data visualization. My primary goal in any role is contributing to an ecosystem of sustainable growth and development. I'm open to work immediately and am authorized to work in the United States as a citizen. I have a brief blurb of my experience. 2013 is when I started as an intern at a company and eventually took on more of an architecture role. That was a small company, so it was easier for me to move up into more of a architecture role. 2016, I founded a student organization. In 2017, I was a web developer for University of Illinois Extension. 2018, I got my first quote-unquote adult job. I was out of college. 2019, I started working at the company that I stayed at for the longest, which was 2 years. In 2021, I started mentoring people, and in 2022, I got hired as a senior software engineer. 2022, I got fired twice, so that year just generally was pretty terrible for me. I stand by the decisions that I made because, yeah, I mean, the reasons why I made the decisions that I did were because of where we were in those projects. Contributing to an ecosystem of sustainable growth and development sometimes means that you need to pause some feature implementations so you can revisit the architecture and make sure that you can kind of just throw stuff at the code base and be relatively sure that you're not creating loads of technical debt. Technical debt, I know, is something that always exists across organizations, but it's something that you kind of need to clean as you go. Putting it off until one large sprint where you're like, hey, we need to revisit all of this technical debt makes it so much larger and so much more difficult. Because over the entire course of acknowledging technical debt, every single developer who interacts with that code base is going to have their own view of what needs to change. If you let every single person have their own way with the code base, those are going to be very different styles. So one large, let's refactor everything, let's change the way everything works, just isn't really effective at all. Having some sort of incremental, hey, so this is the area where all of these features align in this kind of way, let's consolidate them. Having that be a constant process is pretty important. At the site stabilization, actually, let me go back to Curology just briefly. So part of the The thing that I did to stand out was I have this skim mode and read mode. Skim mode is to highlight the stuff that I wanted to stand out. These are the things that made me really excited to work specifically for Curology. I went through the job listing and careers page. The job listing is closed. The careers page, I'm sure, has been updated. Diversity they value. Accountability. So I don't believe any of this. They have updated this a bit. Yeah. And then I went through the things that stood out from the job listing. These are the goals that they said, company mission, why this role. So I went through all of them pretty intentionally and said why I might be a good fit, the things that I'm looking about, the values that stood out, what we care about, life at Curology, etc. So this is something that was intentional, and part of the coding challenge was implementing tic-tac-toe. I got pretty close, but I don't think that I finished. And so I just implemented it as part of my cover letter. I sent this to them, I want to say 5 times, and it was shared amongst the team. So I was fired in under 90 days before a 90-day review that I anticipated from the site stabilization team. I was hired because I had experience both on the front end and the back end. I was hired to the search engine optimization team, which turned into the site stabilization team, and that team lost 2/3 of its members while, like, in the first 2 months that I was there. They were hiring people actively. There was a new developer who joined, and a new developer who was about to join when I was let go, when I was fired, I should say. Part of what went into this is I said that I was pursuing an ADHD diagnosis. I mentioned this in the interview process. I specifically chose Curology because I was pursuing this. They seemed empathetic. Having the values that they did, it kind of seemed like that would be something meaningful to them. Did it mention that? I don't know. Life at Curology, balance work and life. I don't know. Champion inclusivity. They mentioned something about. Oh yeah, the DEIB page mentioned something about creating an environment where all talent can thrive. So it seemed like they were a good fit, and I was fired a week after my ADHD screening, which they were aware of. I was given a ticket that previously my manager said was low priority, and while I was still pursuing a diagnosis, she went to HR and said something about whatever, and HR gave me a deadline to get that diagnosis, which made me entirely stressed out. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to accommodate for a deadline to get diagnosed because that's not really how the medical system works. And I still completed the tasks that I was given, the low priority tasks. I completed them the morning that I was let go. 2 weeks before my 90-day review. I think I was there for 74 days. And they have this thing that says, like, even 90 days risk-free Curology. I saw that on Instagram. And it's interesting that they acknowledge that 90 days is something tangible. They mentioned having an unlimited PTO policy, but I was still fired in under 90 days for underperforming. I lost insurance, so I was unable to actually complete the diagnosis process. And since I just have found new ways to manage, to navigate ADHD, and I don't even know Like, I don't mind what it's called. I don't need to call it ADHD. I personally think that's a terrible term for it. Just neurodivergence in general is the neurotype, it's the structure of my brain. There are a lot of different ways for that to impact people, and it really depends on the kinds of environment they exist in and the kinds of things that they're required to do. So that is definitely isn't one size fits all. Getting diagnosed with ADHD is such a low priority for me, but having a company that understands that's how I work, fundamentally, it's just how I work. It's not that I'm trying to do it that way, it's not that I prefer to do it that way, it is just fundamentally how my brain works. It doesn't mean that I can't do stuff, because I can. I can keep a rhythm. I've been doing this 13-day cycle consistently for this is the 8th month that I've been doing it intentionally, and today's the 13th. So at the start of each month, I start a 13-day timer. Each day, I try to focus on a different dimension specified by a language that I created called Swoop. And it works. There are two 13-day cycles per month. At the end of each 13 days, I go back through all of the dimensions and all of the stuff that I've been working on and try to make it consolidated so that other people can interact with it. And that works for me. It's consistent. I can do that all the time, and there are a lot of things that I've done with that rhythm. But trying to change that towards a specific job just takes time. Last year I was fired twice in under 90 days, which meant that I only really got to understand what the organization was trying to do and some of the rhythm behind that. One of the best analogies that I've come up with for describing why I made the decisions the way that I did was 5 to the 13th is 1.2 billion. Thirteen to the 5th is 370,000. That's significantly larger, but 5 is smaller than 13. So if I start with 5, expecting to raise that to the 13th, my manager only really sees that it's not 13, at least at the past two companies that I worked for. So it is just kind of defeating a little bit, but I do want to move on and take my experiences with those companies and bring them into a new space. So in these cases, I have 7 sites that are up right now. Boon, Bane, Bonk, Bone, Hunk, Lore, Boof. Boof is the name of my dog, and they all have a button that doesn't do anything. It doesn't even report analytics. You can focus it, you can tab to the button, and you can click it and see those states represented. But that's it. This is where we are now. I started developing this site with ChatGPT. Is it open? Yeah, I don't have the actual chat open, but I thought it would be interesting. This doesn't look like anything. Like, it's different than my cover letter. You can see that this is a bit more aesthetically intentional. The font that I'm using is the same because I just love JetBrains Mono. I'm used to it because I use JetBrains products a lot. And this isn't anything specific yet. The concept is that all of these sites are going to be related to each other. Right now, Boneland is in the center because I want that to be the ground sense. Maybe it should be. I think this is the proper order of how I want to approach the sites. But the idea is that you would go to each of these sites and it would kind of be like trick-or-treating, where each of them has a different vibe per day. And you use that to extend your own universe. I like the idea of these sites being zero party first. I need to figure out, like, how do I say this? There are going to be different channels for monetizing each of these domains. and they're going to have different audiences. I don't really want everyone to go to all of these sites all the time. Like making content for children is very different than making content for people who aren't children. Teenagers are a different demographic than young adults, and young adults are a different demographic than older adults. What are the categories? I don't think that I would make a website for an infant. So there's children, teens, young adults, maybe middle adults, and older adults. They all have different goals and different ways to engage with the world. But pretty much the idea. Do I have any squares here? Yeah, I do. So in this picture, I guess I can't. Let me see if I can make that bigger. How does this? Can I just copy outer HTML? Yeah, that's not the greatest. I could think more about this, but the idea is that you would have a name or title on the 1 by 2 squares. This is 1 inch by 2 inches. And you would have an image or a prompt on the 2 by 2 inch squares. And that works out pretty well because, like, theoretically, you could write software that recognizes these visually, either by the outline, which would be unique because these are done by humans. They aren't going to be perfect. They could be done intentionally imperfectly, so they're more recognizable. Theoretically, you could print them as well. But the idea is that you would be able to recognize these squares and tiles as keys, pass keys. And then for each of these sites, you would have something different that happens depending on what you can access. I want to be mindful of the writer's strike. I don't want to scab or like step on what is it called? Crossing strike lines or something like that. I just want to make sure that I'm contributing to an ecosystem of sustainable growth and development, as always.